Is anxiety running your life? If you're feeling like you're constantly struggling with anxious thoughts all day, catastrophizing, ruminating thoughts, this video is for you. I'm going to share my 6 top tips for anxiety that have helped myself and lots of my patients get through anxiety. I'm definitely no stranger to anxiety, so half of this is my own journey as well. If you have not hit the subscribe button yet, hit that button to be notified anytime I post new content related to women's health, hormones, and holistic health. Anxiety is such a nuanced conversation, you guys. It's tough, and a lot of people really struggle with anxiety and all these anxious thoughts. I think that, one problem that we have is maybe, in my own opinion, how we kind of view anxiety. So I think a lot of us view anxiety as like this medical condition that we have to get rid of and curb, and then it's bad, and that we're the anxious person. And we kind of get scared of the anxiety, and then we sort of are in this like vicious perpetual cycle. So one thing that really helped me with my own anxiety journey is to understand why it's there and how our brain actually works is super empowering. So when we feel anxious, our brain is constantly, there's a part in our brain that's called the amygdala. The amygdala is constantly scanning our environment for dangerous things and scary things and threatening things so that it knows, hey, produce cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, get into the fight or flight response so that we can get out of the situation and feel safe. Much like if you were being chased by a bear. So a lot of our ancestors, that was this fight or flight response. They'd either fight, flight, or flee. Now, we are not necessarily being chased by bears on a daily basis, but also things like perfectionism and overwhelm, people pleasing, being addicted to affirmation, lack of boundaries. These things are all also very threatening to us. Conflict can be threatening. Our brains over time have learned what to be anxious of. When we came out of the womb, we weren't innately anxious of anything because we didn't know what the world was about. So over time, you've learned to be anxious of things. So maybe you grew up with somebody like a parent who had a big temper and had a lot of anger, and you learned that you didn't cross that, you just were quiet, and then that's how you kind of survived in this world. And so now you get anxious when there's conflict because that feels really scary and threatening because your brain remembers those things that you learned when you were a kid. So our brain has been wired in a way of what this world looks like, which I always say this, stress and anxiety is so much more our perception of what's happening than what's actually happening. If we view things as being scary or threatening or dangerous, that's how our body's going to respond to it. So I think that that's helpful to understand that when you're feeling the symptoms of anxiety, which can be so freaking widespread, it can be, there's hundreds of symptoms of anxiety, right? So there's dizziness and lightheadedness, and there's heart palpitations, and there's GI issues, and then there's shaking, and then there's temperature dysregulation. Anything that's really by our autonomic nervous system can be impacted by anxiety. You can have dry mouth, you can feel nauseous, you can feel your eyes twitch, or there's ringing in your ears. There's so many different things. And when you're feeling that, then a lot of people start to get anxious of those feelings, and then the cycle kind of starts and is perpetuated. So for me, it was helpful to realize when I had those physical symptoms, okay, my brain feels unsafe, something that doesn't feel safe about my situation right now. And it might be, external, it might be internally produced, like I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself, that doesn't feel very safe. I need everything to be perfect, or if it's not, that doesn't feel safe. It might be something like that too. And some people know why they're anxious and other people don't know why they're anxious. Either is okay. Okay, so number 2 leads me to this. You are not a problem if you're anxious. Anxiety is literally a state of your nervous system, not a personality characteristic. Yes, I think that there are people who are more prone to anxiety, but I also believe that we have learned a lot of those tendencies. So kind of going back to when we were kids, if you're around somebody who is very anxious a lot, your parent, caregiver, grandparent, whoever, you kind of learn to be a little bit more anxious. So I think that there's a lot more research into this, like the genetic components versus like the, nature versus nurture, basically, of figuring out all of this. And I don't think that we've probably will never come to complete conclusion on it, because it's just, the brain's just so fascinating, right? And so complex. But I think that, so many of us were like, okay, what can I do for anxiety? Do I take SSRIs? Do I take herbs? Do I meditate? Do I go for walks? How do I get rid of this anxiety? And when you do that, you're telling your brain this innate thing that we feel, this fear response that we're having, is wrong. And so then each and every time we get that anxious feeling, then our brain's like, oh, remember, this isn't right. This isn't okay. This isn't safe to feel. And so then it kind of perpetuates that cycle. So really, I think like the more, for myself and so many patients that I talk to, the more like acceptance of the anxiety, instead of trying to like push it away, resist it, get it to go away, is so much more helpful. Like, even it all boils down to intention. Even like when you meditate, there's so much great research around meditation and calming the nervous system and helping with mindfulness and anxiety and all that stuff. But if you consistently meditate and you're like, okay, I gotta meditate, I feel so anxious, I gotta get this to go away, I gotta breathe, you are again telling your brain that anxiety is a big problem, and that is the furthest thing that you wanna do. When I have anxiety now, I will just simply stop for a moment and say, okay, this is just anxiety. Like, cool, my brain just doesn't feel great. I'm just gonna let it kind of travel this curve. It starts ramping up, it reaches a peak, and then it will start to come back down. And I really don't try to like interrupt that from happening, other than just keeping myself feeling like it's not a big deal. So if you kind of respond to it as like, oh my God, I'm anxious, what do I do about this? I hate this feeling, make it go away. What do I take? What do I do? Again, you're just ramping up sort of those messages of danger versus messages of safety. Like, okay, this is just anxiety. We're okay. Not a big deal. This will get over soon. This is just a state of the nervous system. My brain feels freaked out. We're safe. We're good. That's going to help you travel that fight or flight curve much faster. This brings me to number 3, which is don't get stuck in the cycle of being scared of the anxiety itself. So we've talked about exactly why it happens. We've talked about how it's benign. Yes, it's uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable, and I get that 1000%. It feels, especially when you start to get like symptom after symptom and you don't know what's going on, that can feel very scary. I get it. I've been there. I totally understand that. But the faster that you can convince yourself that you're okay, this is just anxiety, it's just part of this fight or flight response, the faster you will get through it. And then you decide not to be scared of the cycle itself. So for example, with anxiety, the pattern can be, if you get anxious on an airplane, then your brain has learned that airplanes are dangerous because you got anxious there. And so then the next time you get on an airplane, you've like planted the seed, right? So you're like, oh my God, is that gonna happen again? Am I gonna have a panic attack on this plane? Am I gonna be anxious? Is it gonna be okay? And then we start wiring our brain more and more and more. What we tell our brains, what we focus on, is literally what we get back in every single facet. So if you keep saying, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, that is exactly what you're gonna get back. Or I had this panic attack on a plane, planes aren't safe, or crowds aren't safe, or stores aren't safe, or I'm claustrophobic, or snakes aren't safe. Like any of those things, you keep telling yourself over and over and over, that is only going to simply make it worse. And our world with anxiety can get smaller and smaller and smaller until your safety zone or comfort zone is a very small thing. Which is not what we want. We want to be able to be resilient and have a bigger comfort zone so that obviously we can experience life. So one of my other things is so I'll give you a perfect example. Like for me, flying was a big thing. I still don't love to fly, but I have to make myself fly. Otherwise, if I don't, it's just going to get scarier and scarier. You really do have to kind of push yourself when you have anxiety to keep doing things. Otherwise, like I said, the world gets real small real fast. So I think, like, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I think like a little bit of exposure therapy of like things that you are scared of. Maybe you got in a car accident and you're scared of driving. I think that, you know, kind of forcing yourself to go on like small drives. We don't want to invoke panic attacks and things like that, but like just stopping is going to make it so much scarier and, you know, pretty much prevent you from doing it in the future. So you really want to recognize why it's happening and just realize your brain learned this. This flying for me, for example, was not scary for a really long time. I've traveled to Asia, I've traveled to Australia, I've traveled the continental US lots and lots of times. I went to college in Arizona and flew home back to Nebraska, you know, tons and tons of times a year. And all of a sudden I just had this one flight that just planted a seed that like this might be unsafe. And that is what made me feel scared of flying. So I actually was fine with flying for a real long time. And I think that that's the way of a lot of people. Like if you get in a car accident, like you weren't always scared of driving. You learn to be scared of driving. And so where we learn something, we can also unlearn something if we actively take a role in that process. So I think it's important to not get stuck in the cycle of being scared of the anxiety. I also think, like I said, so for me with the plane, I'm actually not scared of flying. Like I know flying's super safe. It's more that I'm scared of the anxiety that I'm going to have on the plane, or I was. And so that's more, you know, there's lots of different strategies for that. But again, being scared of the anxiety is really what makes it debilitating more than the situation itself. So working on, okay, when you're anxious, like, okay, this is fine. We are okay. We don't need to resist this. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but this is just a normal part of the human experience. We're fine. You can maybe take some deep breaths, but being in a more place of acceptance of the physical anxiety is extremely helpful at teaching your brain that this is okay and this is safe. Number 4 is preemptively soothe your nervous system. So I also think for those of us who like don't have like a plane or a car, like a specific thing that makes you anxious, but you just struggle with anxiety in your daily life, I think that a lot of it stems from things like perfectionism, people pleasing, lack of boundaries, overwhelm, you know, lack of downtime, those types of things. And I think your body just gets used to this like fight or flight response. Perfectionism is basically, as in Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown, sort of like the addictive, destructive behavior of thinking that if you're perfect, you look perfect, house perfect, kids perfect, whatever, everything that you have is perfect, you can avoid the uncomfortable feelings of things like shame. And so when you don't have something perfect in your life, like maybe your house is your perfection, and maybe you need your house to look like it's ready to show all the time. And if there's something out of place, that makes you feel really like that anxiety feeling or that OCD feeling. You've taught yourself that if this is out of place, if there's toys on the ground or the vacuum's not, your carpet's not vacuumed or whatever, that is unsafe for you. And so then your body goes into fight or flight. So really, what you want to do is preemptively kind of work on some of the perfectionism, the people pleasing, the overwhelm, those types of things. And also find ways to soothe your nervous system so that it's not always at full capacity. It's not always like at the point of breaking and causing like panic and anxiety. So get downtime, get sleep, go have alone time, go have social time, check in with yourself and ask yourself what you need in your life. Is it downtime, sleep, rest, walk, movement, friends, social time, laughter? Ask yourself what you need and give it that. And all of those things are pressure valve releases for the nervous system to kind of give it a little bit more wiggle room so that it can handle some of the other stressors of life too. Number 5 is identify and validate your emotions. Kind of like we talked about perfectionism and wanting to avoid shame, a lot of women also are avoiders of things like anger and grief and sadness and resentment. We feel there's so much conditioning around all of these things. But if you've ever been told or told yourself, like gaslit yourself, to feel like I need to calm down or just let it go, it wasn't that big of a deal, you stop acting this way, you shouldn't feel this way, you're telling yourself that, again, these biological, these innate emotions that you just feel when a situation happens are wrong, shameful, inappropriate, unacceptable, whatever you're telling yourself. And so each and every time your body or your brain kind of feels like anger, for example, and you've said, nope, we can't feel angry, it's going to get nervous. It's going to get into that fight or flight response. Like, oh no, here we have anger again. We don't feel anger. Anger's bad. And it's going to start to create anxiety. And so I think one of the best things that you can do is actually teach yourself that whatever emotion you feel, whether it's anger, grief, sadness, worry, fear, resentment, guilt, whatever, is okay. They're all part of the normal human experience. And we don't have to run from them. We don't have to feel bad for feeling them. We don't have to think they're unacceptable. We could actually just feel them. And kind of like a rain cloud, just let them be there for a little bit. Okay, this is anger. Okay, cool, this is anger. Not amazing to feel. It doesn't feel great, but it's not dangerous. Okay, this, deep, hole in my heart, this sinking feeling is sadness and grief. Okay, not amazing, but again, part of the human experience. We do have the capacity to feel this. We don't need to shove it away. We don't need to justify it to anybody else or out-justify it to anybody else. We don't need anyone to say like, oh, come on, don't feel that way. Stop doing that. That's all how we've been gaslit to feel these things. And so I think if you have a big emotion throughout the day, identify and validate it. If you don't, you haven't done it at night, just check in with yourself like you would a friend or a kid or a parent or a spouse and just say, hey, how are you today? Like, how are you feeling? Was it a good day, a bad day? Is there any sensations in your chest or your jaw, your stomach? Is there anything going on? What is it? And again, you're not trying to repress it, modify it, change it, get rid of it, none of it. You're just identifying and validating that emotion. And number 6 is breath work. So we know with the fight or flight response that your body's in, or with anxiety that your body's in this fight or flight response. And it's feeling unsafe. It's feeling like it needs these big, huge chemicals to do its job for it, like cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. And so when you are in that fight or flight response, you're breathing right here. It's just like that. When you are safe and calm and content, you breathe slower and deeper into your diaphragm and tummy. And so when you're anxious, you can actually kind of hack into that system and breathe deeper. And that gives your body the signal, hey, we're safe, we're good, we're not freaking out here. We're good. We can take some deep breaths. We can relax. We can do some square breathing where you inhale for 6 seconds, hold for 6 seconds, exhale for 6 seconds, hold that for 6 seconds. So and then you can kind of keep that pattern going. That can be really helpful at just slowing your body down. That's really, really helpful for stopping anxiety too. But again, the biggest tip that I have for you is to stop pathologizing anxiety. Stop thinking that it's a huge problem to solve, that there's something wrong with you, that you need to get rid of this. And start thinking of it as this is just a state of my nervous system. This is a normal human experience. I will give the caveat. I'm not a mental health professional. If you are struggling, your quality of life is very poor, you're really not able to do this work, please talk to a mental health professional, a counselor, a therapist, a doctor. I'm not against SSRIs. I'm not against using medication. There are also herbal formulas that can be very, very helpful with anxiety and calming things down. I am a fan of giving patients the best quality of life. Again, we don't need to be perfectionists and say that we have to avoid all pharmaceuticals. We have to do everything perfectly. I don't think that's a thing. I think if you feel like an SSRI would be helpful to you, fantastic. But I also think despite whatever decision you make on that, I do think doing this work, emotional work, your inner work, is super, super important. So pharmaceutical or not, I do think that everything that I mentioned here, super helpful for anxiety in general. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you have friends and family that are struggling with anxiety, share this with them. I talk about this with so many patients because like I said, I think our mindset is just wrong about anxiety, honestly. I think that we've just created this place where everyone feels like it's wrong and there's something wrong with us and we need to get rid of it. And I think if we actually just change the conversation around anxiety and we're more accepting of it and more helpful to those of us who have it, I think it would be so much better. But anyways, so if you have friends and family with anxiety, share this video. I do have a program that's called the Anxiety Fix. I will actually leave that in the show notes below or the description below because it goes through all of this and more for a super affordable price. And like I said, I've struggled with anxiety in my own life, and this is my whole journey through this of everything that has worked and has not worked. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. So if you have questions, comment in the comments below and I'm happy to help. I'll see you guys in the next one.